Okay, folks, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a Daily Power Parsha. It is great to see you today, Wednesday, May 4th, 2022. We have a lot to talk about because this week, as you know, Torah portion is Kedoshim, and Kedoshim is all filled with a variety of mitzvot, variety of laws that govern day-to-day life, Jewish ritual life, and all of the above. It's great if you want a kind of a shmorg, as they say. If you want a buffet of Jewish law and Jewish values and Jewish ideas, Kedoshim is one of your Torah portions that you love. We've talked about so many different things, ranging from Shabbat observance, honoring, revering one's parents, all the way down to not putting a stumbling block in front of the blind and not cursing someone who's deaf, which I think is how we ended yesterday's conversation with those mitzvot, or prohibitions in this case, that heighten our sensitivity toward others, even if we could tell ourselves, they can't hear it anyway, they'll never know, doesn't let us off the hook. You know, the famous philosophical question, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around, does it make a sound? You know, if we apply that to ethics, if we can do something wrong, but that no one will find out about it, is it still wrong? What's the Jewish answer? Yes, still wrong. It's still wrong. The other guy's never going to find out about it. Doesn't matter. First of all, God knows. But even if we leave God out of the conversation for a second, the reality is that I know what kind of person I am. In other words, somebody's trying to get a good hook to explain this, or a good angle to explain this. You know, sometimes we behave one way behind closed doors and another way out beyond closed doors. So like when we're out in public, we're like so nice and so kind and so generous. Behind closed doors, sometimes a person, obviously present company excluded, a person might be a little bit different. The question is, who are you fooling? Because if life is all about fooling someone else, then you get a check mark. But if life is about being a mensch, being a good person, so that's not only vis-a-vis someone else, it's vis-a-vis ourselves. It's vis-a-vis the way we are behind closed doors. So really the divide between inside and outside is an artificial divide that really shouldn't actually be there. All right, so with that being said, the point of Torah, the point of mitzvot, is to inspire us to dissolve the divide between inside and outside and be authentically menschy, be an authentic mensch, whether we're in public or whether we are in private. Okay, so that's a little bit of a kind of a reflection on what we covered yesterday. Let's let Olia in. Okay, so let's jump now into the brand new reading. I'm going to share my screen. Hey, Olia, welcome. Okay, here we go. We have the reading that will appear right now. Torah reading for Kedoshim. Today is Wednesday, reading number 4, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 33. All right, I begin. When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not taunt him. No taunting the stranger. Again, it's about sensitivity. It's a sensitivity and respect and what we would call in Yiddish a menschlichkeit, or being a mensch. The stranger who sojourns with you shall be as a native from among you. Treat the newcomer as you do the native. This is like every society, every group has dealt with this tension. You have a group and someone joins. Suddenly there's a +1. How do you treat them? As an outsider? Treat them like an insider. That's what the Torah is telling us. The stranger who sojourns with you shall be as a native from among you, and you shall love him as yourself. Now, we had earlier in this week's Torah portion, we had in verse 18, love your fellow as yourself. This is even deeper. It's not only your fellow who looks like you, it's the stranger. Love the stranger as yourself. Are you with me? That's like a much more, that's a heightened level of love. And why? What's the rationale? God says to us, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. In other words, you know what it's like to be an outsider. You know what it's like to be othered, to be treated as an other, to be othered. because you weren't from there. You didn't look like them. You didn't act like them. You didn't speak like them. You didn't dress like them. You know what it's like, and you know where that can lead. That can lead to slavery. It can lead to human abusing another human being. And that is absolutely forbidden. It's absolutely off the table. It's absolutely not kosher. So the stranger who's with you, you have to treat them like yourself. You have to love them as yourself. You can relate to it. You were strangers in Egypt. You know what that's like. And then, of course, the verse concludes, as it's done in many places in the Parsha, I am the Lord your God. And that's usually, as we saw in Rashi yesterday, that's usually hinting to the fact that even though you might pretend to others and get away with whatever behavior, whatever attitude you have, but God says, I know what you're really thinking. I know your true intention. No games. You can't play games with me. Make sure you really respect and love the stranger like yourself. I'm God. I'm on top of this. Okay, let's actually do Rashi. We'll do a little bit differently today. Let's do Rashi section by section. So the Torah says, God says, you shall not taunt him. Don't taunt the stranger. This refers to tormenting with words as opposed to financially. Now, not that you're allowed to torment him financially. No, obviously not. You can't steal from someone because they're a newcomer. It's like, oh, hey, welcome. Let me rip you off. That's obviously not okay. But this means even what we would call in Yiddish a stech, even like a pinch or like a squeeze, like a little bit of mocking that person. Also not okay. For instance, and here's a clear and classic example. Do not say to him, only yesterday you were an idol worshiper, and now you come to learn Torah, which is given over by the Almighty God himself. Who are you? Again, this is something that the clique might say to the newcomer. It's like, oh, look who Johnny come lately. Suddenly you want to learn Torah? I don't know. Yesterday you were serving idols, and now you're showing up to study Torah? Get out of here. That is not okay. Even if you don't say get out of here, even if you like point out like, oh, wow, look at this, look where you're coming from. That judgment, that harsh and negative verbiage, forbidden. So when the Torah says you shall not taunt him, Rashi explains, because tonu or losono also really means don't hurt him, don't torment him. Rashi is the one who explains, based on, of course, Torah Kahana, based on the Midrash, that what we're referring to here is tormenting with words. Therefore, the translation here is do not taunt him with words, remind him that he is the outsider, remind him that he is the newcomer. You cannot do that. Not okay, not kosher. In other words, if you really love him, speak to him like you love him. Don't, nothing else. All right. Then the Torah says, what's the rationale? What does God say? For you were strangers. You were strangers. You were outsiders. Rashi from Bava Metzia, Rashi gives a deeper angle than what I shared before. Do not accuse your fellow man with your own defect. What are you going to do? Call him out? Oh, Johnny, come, look who's here now. Weren't you an idol worshiper? Weren't you in the land? You're a stranger. You're a newcomer. Hello, you were also. What are you calling out this guy? You were the same thing. So the Hebrew is much better. Mum shabach al tomer lechaverach. Your own mum, your own, it literally means blemish, but here, your own defect or care, let's say it nicely, your own narrative, your own story, don't call out someone else for having the same story. Your story is you were strangers, and then you were idol worshippers, then you came to Torah. Great. It's a great narrative. It's your narrative. So extend the same narrative. He's also got the same narrative. Don't call him out on what you have. It's like the pot calling the kettle black or something like that, however that expression goes. Don't call out somebody for being a stranger and a newcomer if literally that's your story also. Wait, so because you have a year on, you have an extra few years under your belt. Big deal. All right. Rashi. Gotta love Rashi. I am the Lord your God. Here, Rashi says the word for your, Elokechem, is in the plural. So your in English, your could mean your singular and your could be plural. Like in Southern, it's different. It's y'all and all y'all. But in your, right, in other English American speaking parts of the world, parts of the country. So your could either mean, oh, I have your phone, speaking to one person, or your lunch is ready, speaking to an entire group of people. So just different, your could be both ways. In the Hebrew, it's Elokecha is singular, Elokechem is plural. Here the word is Elokechem, which means God says, I am the Lord, your God. It's all y'all's God. I am God for all of you. And here Rashi says, scripture reminds you, I am your God and his God. I'm not only your God. Don't be so exclusive. Say, oh, God's for me, not for you. You're a newcomer. You're a stranger. We don't want you. You're not welcome. Don't be protected. God says, don't be so protective over me. I'm a God for everybody. I'm all y'all's God. All right. If God was from the south. Verse 35. All right, back inside. Let's toggle Rashi off. It's a very short reading today, by the way. We may go into the next reading, or maybe we'll just schmooze on this one, or maybe we'll just we'll end it a little bit earlier than usual. Verse 35, you shall not commit a perversion of justice with measures. I love this law. So don't commit a perversion of justice with measures. Measures means literally weights, as the Torah clarifies, weights or liquid measures. So I'll give you an example, classic example. You have a store, a dry goods store. Remember those stores? Like a dry goods, the general store, a dry goods store? Okay. You're selling flour. How are you selling flour? Old school. You measure out flour, right? And you have a scale and you weigh it. So let's say you're the owner of the shop and your price is $1. Just work with me here. $1 per pound of flour. Every pound of flour is $1. Easy peasy formula. Great. You might be incentivized to tweak your scales. Not you specifically, but one might be incentivized to tweak their scales so that it shows a pound, even though it's 7/8 of a pound. In other words, how to manipulate the scale that it should read. The reading should be 1 pound, but really how much you're giving them is only 7/8 of a pound of flour. So therefore you're getting the dollar, but not giving them the full measure of flour that they actually think that they're purchasing. The Torah therefore says you're not allowed to commit fraud. Don't have any false weights or measures. Liquid measure, the same thing. Let's say you're selling milk by the cup. A cup is how much? A cup is, help me out here. 16 ounces is a cup. 16 ounces.
8 ounces.
8 ounces or 16? 8?
8.
What's 16 ounces? Why can't I remember my liquid measures here? Is that a all right, hold on. How many ounces in a cup? Cup is going to be 8 ounces.
Right.
Yes. Okay. How many ounce? What is 16 ounces called? Hold on. Anyone listening to this is probably like, oh man, you don't even know this. Okay, listen. Don't judge. 16 ounces a pound. There you go. 16 ounces a pound. That's a weight. Let's deal with cups. Okay, great. So let's get back to cups. All right. Okay. So now let's say you have a store, you have a farm. Even better, you have a farm. I've always wanted to have a farm, but not right now. So you have a farm and you're selling milk. And you're selling milk by the cup, 8 ounces for $1. That's it. Sell a cup for $1. Milk, you have a little stand on the side of the road. Meanwhile, and you have a measuring thing, right? You take the milk, you have a big, jug, pitcher of milk. You pour it into a cup that has a measure on it that says 8 ounces. And then you either give it to the customer or you then pour it into the customer's bottle, whatever it is. I don't know. Figure out your own scenario there. But let's say instead of 8 ounces, I'm really only giving 7 ounces, but my cup is marked 8 ounces. That's called fraud or theft, whatever you want to call it. You're charging, you're telling the customer that you're giving them 8 ounces. You're charging them for your listed price for 8 ounces for 1 cup, and yet you're delivering less than 8 ounces, less than a cup. It's not honest. So the Torah says, do not have fraudulent weights, dry weights, or liquid measure. Okay, no fraudulent weights or measures. Not kosher, not cool. All right. Now, that is the Torah's prohibition here. You know, they would joke about the butcher. The butcher would put their thumb when they were weighing the meat. They would like put a little squeeze on the scale. You know, how much is it? Yeah, it's a pound. But meanwhile, you're just applying a drop of pressure. That's not, I mean, maybe that's not a fraudulent scale. It's a fraudulent thumb, but nonetheless, it is not so kosher. All right, back inside. Let's jump back inside to continue. So the Torah says, don't commit a perversion of justice with measures, weights, or liquid measures. Rather, 36, you shall have true scales, true weights, a true ephah, that's a weight, a true hin, that's another type of measurement. Ephah and hin are 2 types of ancient biblical measurements. If it's an ephah, it's got to be a true ephah. If it's a hin, it's got to be a true hin. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Now God is introducing himself. Not only I am the Lord your God, but who took you out of Egypt. Now you know you're in trouble. If God is mentioning also the Exodus, it's like when you get called by your middle name by a parent. But here God is calling himself by his middle name, so to speak. It's like, I am the Lord your God, not this one over here, but I'm the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. All right, fine. I will not do this. I know what you're capable of. I saw the plagues. I know the story. I read the book. I saw the movie. I've reenacted it on Passover. We're not going to mess around with the weights and measures. You shall observe all my statutes and all my ordinances and fulfill them. I am the Lord. All right, let's look into Rashi. By the way, they have the same thing regarding gasoline. You're standing by the pump and you're filling up gas. And the little machine, the pump, tells you, oh, you just a gallon, and now it's, I don't know, $4 a gallon, around that price. So, oh, you got a gallon, $4, 2 gallons, $8. How do you know that you're actually getting 1, 2, 3, or 4 gallons or 16 gallons? How do you know how much gallons you get? You're trusting the machine.
Right.
Good. Do you know, and I'm sure you do, that all these machines, there is a certifying board from the state of Georgia that goes around to check these machines to make sure everything's kosher? I believe so, because they have certificates, they have seals on it. You ever notice those seals? Right? It's been approved. It's like I noticed seals on elevators and on gas pumps. It's like, okay, good. I want to know that this elevator is going to work. That's
Yes.
that I think that's important, right? I want to make sure it opens and closes and goes up and down and doesn't do anything else that it shouldn't be doing. And I want to make sure, we want to make sure it's within the public interest that people that are paying for 10 gallons of gas are getting 10 gallons of gas and not 9 gallons and 9.75 gallons. It's important. It's important. And the Torah mandates this. It's a biblical obligation, and God interjects himself in this conversation. God says, you don't do this. Don't have false measures, weights and measures, and have rather true weights and measures. I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. God is making this personal. God is making this a religious obligation, not just a human civil obligation toward each other. God is interjecting himself in the narrative, saying, this is very important to me, that society runs in a kosher fashion. Let's read this inside. You shall not commit a perversion of justice. Rashi says, if we are dealing here with litigation, then scripture has already stated, you shall commit no injustice or judgment. So what is the judgment that is taught here? If you look at verse 35, it says, you shall not commit a perversion of justice. And then it says with measures, weights, or liquid. So the question is, what does justice mean? Is it the justice system, the legal system? No, we already talked about that before in the beginning of the Torah portion. So what is the judgment that is taught here? The answer is, it refers to just behavior regarding one's dealing with measures, weights, or liquid measures. In other words, if you read the whole verse and you don't stop after the word justice, then you understand what it means. You shall not commit a perversion of justice. What type of perversion? What, false convictions? No, a perversion of justice regarding measures, weights, or liquid measures. This teaches us that listen to this, that one who measures out something in business is called the judge. The Torah calls this a measure of justice. If you're the one measuring, if you're the one pouring out the stuff for someone else, if you're weighing out a pound of flour or a cup of milk, you're being a judge. For if he falsifies the measure, he's considered to be as one who perverts justice. You're the judge, and you have to be trustworthy as a judge. You cannot be a false judge. Do not pervert justice. They're relying on you for the correct verdict. Your verdict is, it's a pound. Is it a pound? Don't mess around if it's not a pound. Don't pervert justice by decreeing that this is a pound, decreeing this is a cup if it's not. He is accordingly, if he does so, if he does measure out falsely, he is accordingly called perverse, hated, disgusting, fit for destruction, and abomination, as Rashi said above, regarding a judge who judges unjustly. Moreover, he brings about the 5 things stated regarding a corrupt judge, namely that he A, defiles the land, B, desecrates the name of God, C, drives away the divine presence, D, causes Israel to fall by the sword, and E, exiles Israel from the land. Yes, the thumb on the scale, the 7 ounce cup, and the 7/8 of a pound can lead to all of these things: defiles the land, desecrates the name of God, drives with the divine presence, causes Israel to fall, and exiles Israel from the land. God forbid it should ever happen, right? We're not asking for this. But the point is that it's a very significant area to be careful of. It's very
Rabbi,
easy to fudge, yeah.
wasn't the first time they talked about weight when Abraham was paying in silver for Sarah's grave?
You might be right. It says that he measured out the coins. You're right. Yeah. That might be the earliest time that we think that we have the idea of measuring. And think about, that's a good point. Think about currency. A pound of gold, it better be a pound of gold, right? If you promise a pound of gold, right? Let's say you're selling an ounce of gold is very expensive. Let's say a pound of gold, who knows how? Let's just Google it. I'm in a Googling mood. Sorry. So I have to wait for a while. I Google this. How much is a pound of gold? All right. How much is a pound of gold worth? Based on, oh, come on. Cost of 1 ounce of gold. Okay, ready? Current ounce of gold. Oh, now it's getting complicated. A troy ounce? I don't know what a troy ounce is.
Well, gold is sold by the ounce. The purest gold, like on the markets, is sold by the ounce.
So is it around maybe 1,300? Does that make sense?
Yes.
What's a troy ounce? Do you know what that is?
I don't now. I'd have to Google it.
Well, you wouldn't be the first one to be Googling today. But anyway, the point is that let's say an ounce is around, I don't know, I saw 1,300 to 1,500.
Yes.
Maybe higher. So let's say it's 1,500. Let's just give a round number, 1,500. So that's 1,500 times 16, because there's 16 ounces in a pound, which we established before. So if it's 1,500, right, times 16, so then your pound of gold, wow, $24,000. Holy
Right.
cow. That's a lot of...
A troy ounce is a metric term. It's like 31 point whatever grams, whereas an ounce is equivalent to 28.349. So
That's
it is measured in the metric system and not the...
Got it. Well, I'm just going to be inaccurate and go somewhere in the middle and say, let's just, for argument's sake, put out a number of 1,500 for like a US ounce and 16 ounces in a pound. So we're looking at about, again, give or take, because I'm totally making this up, about $24,000 for 1 pound brick of gold. And imagine if you're selling it to someone and they give you, I just imagine a briefcase being involved here, $24,000 of unmarked, I'm kidding, not unmarked, of bills to pay for that brick. you best believe that better be a brick. Make sure that's a pound of gold. If someone's giving you cash, especially on a street corner for that gold, yeah, you probably don't want to short them by hooking them up with 15 ounces of gold when you promised 16. That's not going to end well. And that's not the dude on the corner saying that. That's God saying that. Oh, plot twist. God is saying, don't do that. Forget this dude with the shady hat and jacket. I don't know why I'm thinking of a fedora now, Chabanic, but yeah, forget the dude in the shady back alley deal. God is saying it's not going to end well. If you're shorting said buyer by an ounce and selling what's allegedly a pound of gold when it's only 15 ounces for the price of a pound, yeah, that's God's not happy with that, defiles the land, and ultimately leads to exile, which is not a good thing. All right, back inside. I do not want to share the calculator. I want to share my screen. All right, let's talk about the various options of fraud measures. This refers to a land measure. Oh, we didn't even use that before when I mentioned it. Land measure, area of length of land. That's important. When the Torah says don't mess around with measures, that means with land measure. If I'm selling you an acre of land, again, you best believe it better be an acre of land and not anything else other than an acre. So that's that. Weights, Rashi says, is obvious according to its apparent meaning. Weights means, yeah, straight up a weight. And liquid measure refers to liquid measures, as the name indicates. So we have three areas, all puns intended, 3 areas of potential fraud, and the Torah is saying don't do the fraud. If you're selling space, make sure it's the right space. If you're buying a house that's 2,800 square feet, it should be 2,800 square feet. Don't lie about that. If you're selling something by weight, a pound of flour, it's got to be a pound of flour. If you're selling liquid measure, 8 ounces of milk, make sure the ounceage is correct, liquid measure. So that's what Torah says. You shall have true scales, true weights, a true ephah, true hin. So here we go. True weights, Rashi says, means literally stones of righteousness. May all your stones be righteous. What does that mean? These are the weights people use to weigh against, i.e. a standard weight on the scales. If you have a scale, old school scale, right? Old school balance scale. I feel like that should be brought back in vogue. Old school balance scale. Right. And you put on the one side a bunch of flour, and the other side you drop 1 pound, because you're selling a pound of flour. So you drop a pound block on the one side, and then you're measuring the flour until it bounces out. Guess what? Make sure that's a pound and not 7/8 of a pound, because that would be lying. That would be stealing. That's not good. God doesn't like it. Let's continue. True ephah, that's a unit of dry measure. A true hin is a measure of liquid measure, or it's a unit of liquid measure. God says, I am the God who brought you out of Egypt, Rashi says, on the condition to observe these commandments. I took you out as a nation, and I gave you the Torah so that you live at a higher standard. In business, it might have been normal, and it may still be normal, to cut corners in certain places to make more profit. But God says, that's not how I want you to be. I'm holding you to a higher standard. That's why I took you out of Egypt. Another explanation. God says in Egypt, I discern between the drop of sperm that led to the conception of a firstborn and the drop of sperm that did not lead to the conception of a firstborn. This is obviously referring to plague number 10, where God killed the firstborn Egyptians. God says, I'm able to figure out who's the firstborn and who's not the firstborn. Likewise, God says, I am the one faithful to exact punishment upon someone who secretly stores his weights in salt, thus altering their weight in order to defraud people who do not recognize them as weights that have been tampered with. Apparently, Rashi just dropped the clue about how to manipulate your weights. I don't know if you noticed that Rashi gives a pro tip. if you wanna mess around with your weights, store them in salt, because apparently that does something to the weights that makes them in the seller's favor. So God says, I know if you're storing your weights in salt or not. How does God know? God says, I took you out of Egypt. I'm the one who brought the plagues. Remember plague number 10? I know these things. I know who's firstborn, who's not. I know who stored his weights in salt, who's trying to cause some fraud, and who is kosher. I got this. You can't keep secrets from me. All right, that's what the Talmud says. I love the fact that Rashi just drops a clue about how to, like, not saying you shouldn't do this, but if you were, you might want to look at salt being an additive. I'm not judged, not that you should, Torah says don't do it, but salt is the way to go, but don't do it. I love that. All right. That takes us to the end of the reading. Good questions, comments. I actually have a few things to share, but before I get to what I want to share, let me turn to you. Questions, comments, insights, observations. No? Makes sense? Okay, I want to mention a few things. So number one, the notion of not othering anyone else, right? There were really two themes of today. Like when a stranger joins you, don't push them away. Don't, other them. So that's a very important piece of Judaism, which is respecting everyone and really loving everyone, even the one who is coming from a different context, because that's really the measure of love. That's really to love someone that you already love, to love someone that you know well, it's a good friend. All right, I don't think you need a biblical commandment for that. But to love someone that you might otherwise distance, that's when you need Torah. You need Torah to remind you, be on your best behavior, be a mensch, and love the stranger. So that's one thing. Second thing is remembering our history. It's not only about being humbled about our humble history. It's about recognizing that, as Rashi said, your mum, your defect, I don't like the word defect, but your character, don't hold your history against someone else. Your history is one of being a foreigner, of being oppressed, and being othered, and then, finding this. So don't hold that against someone else. That's your story. But how often do we do that? And we do that, I think, psychologically from a place of not wanting to see that in the mirror, right? When someone has your flaws, you get triggered by it. And I don't know if you even call this a flaw, but look, you're calling it as a flaw, you're calling it out in someone else. So then, all right, in your own understanding, it's a flaw. The reason why that evokes emotion is because it hits close to home, right? If you see somebody acting in a certain way and it really gets you upset, as the Baal Shem Tov teaches, and as we saw today, it's the first question is, 1 second, why am I getting triggered by this? Why is it because on some level I'm struggling with this, or I'm not fully at peace with that part of me? Otherwise, why can't I just look at it and say, I love your idiosyncrasies. Like, wow, it's like you have this quirk about you that's so interesting. I love that. I love people who are different than me. Why can't you do that? Because maybe they're not so different. Maybe they remind you of something about yourself that you're trying to hide. Maybe they remind you of something about yourself that you're trying to bury, like your origin story in Egypt, that you were a foreigner, that you were enslaved, that you were oppressed, that you were enslaved. So you're looking to bury that. You don't want to think about that. You'd rather move on. Somebody who comes from an outsider position now suddenly reminds you of your outsider position. Oh, I don't like that person. You don't like that person, or you don't like that reflection. So these are some of the tough questions that the Torah, that this reading allows us to think about. And just to be very clear here, the Torah is encouraging us not to hold our own baggage or our own unresolved stuff against someone else. On the contrary, if you have been able to get past your past, then offer that other person the same dignity. See them past their past. Look at them in their present and embrace them with love. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. And finally, the idea of weights and measures. Not having false weights and measures. According to halacha, according to the way the Jewish law is codified, the understanding of what we read today is the Torah prohibits not only using the false weights and measures to defraud a customer, but even being in possession of the false weights and measures is problematic. If you recall, and I'll put it back up on the screen, the Torah says, Well, number one, don't commit a perversion of justice. That means don't use it incorrectly. Don't use your weights and measures incorrectly. But then it says 36, you shall have true scales, true weights, true ephah, true hin. In other words, don't even possess those false weights, even if you're never going to use it. If I were to use a gambling example, don't own a pair of loaded dice, even if you're never planning on using it, right? Just don't have it in your possession. And the way the mystics understand this is that every one of us has a measuring system by which we measure ourselves and we measure others. Everyone's got some sort of system by which we assess ourselves and then we assess the other. And the point is, we have to be very careful that we don't have an improper calculus in our own heads, in our own heart, even if we never use it. But having a skewed perspective, that itself is unhealthy. And I'll leave it as general as possible so that we can all apply it in our own way. But having a perspective that is either biased or a little overly self-generous or a little overly critical of others, having a way to measure that's not objective, but rather subjective and skewed is dangerous, even if we tell ourselves that we'll never actually use it. I'm not actually going to do anything. But when I think about you, I got all these judgments that may or may not be accurate. Don't even possess the false weights and measures. Don't even possess a thinking about someone else that's not objective and pure and kind and generous. Never cut someone short. Never cut someone else's measure short even in your own mind, in your own heart. That's a high standard. It's a Torah standard. It's God's standard. No one ever said this would be easy. God didn't say, I'm taking you out of Egypt, life's going to be easy. God says, I'm taking you out of Egypt, and I'm going to give you a way of living that's going to be exceptionally difficult. But it's going to be exceptionally meaningful and exceptionally rich with purpose. Okay? Nothing easy about it. All right. I hope all this makes sense. Questions? Yes. Hold on. Yeah.
One comment. That this one, number 36, is the one that says, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. It just makes me think about Joseph in prison and the baker and the butcher and all the things that they did and did not do to him. And
you're saying that they weren't assisting him. They were putting him in that state of imprisonment and not helping him. And certainly that came from a misjudging of him and an othering. I really think both points are connected in this reading, right? When we have the false weights and measures, we're not looking at someone accurately, and we're looking at ourselves a little more generously and them a little bit less generously, we're overselling ourselves and underselling the other, or undervaluing the other. And that leads to othering, which is the first part of the reading. But you're right. Joseph is given a raw deal. The butcher, the butcher's wife accused him of a crime he didn't commit. Then he's thrown in jail. And then the baker, and then they don't remember. The butler gets out but doesn't remember him. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of not being favorable to him. Yeah. You mentioned a few things. You wanted to share something else? No. Okay. Anybody else? Floor is open. Olia, Sarah, Ray, jump in with any insights if you have.
Rabbi, you mentioned something in the beginning you were reviewing about yesterday, something about a person that can't hear. What exactly was that?
Yes. So I was mentioning that the Torah yesterday prohibits us from cursing someone who can't hear. And the obvious question is, well, what's the problem? If they can't hear, then they'll never know. So let's say they don't, they're in the room, in the other side of the room, and they can't hear, and you say something under your breath. Is it a sin? The Torah says yes. They can't hear it. They'll never find out about it. Doesn't matter. You can't say it. You can't say it because it's not good for you. Besides for the fact that God hears it, certainly. It's also not good for you. Don't be that person that ends up cursing people under their breath, because that doesn't say something positive about you. Anyway, that was the insight that I was sharing before.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. Good to see everybody. Have a wonderful rest of the day. And
7:30 tonight.
7:30 tonight. We are on track for 7:30 tonight. Torah studies. Let's see. The topic of Torah studies tonight is, whenever I'm involved in one area of study, it's always hard to remember the other stuff. Tonight's class is called, learning how to love. How to really love someone like yourself. Because, of course, that's a big theme of this week's Torah portion. Love your fellow as yourself. What does it actually mean to love someone as yourself? How can you mandate an emotion? What if I don't love someone like myself? Is there any way to get over that, past that, etc.? So join me tonight at 7:30, either in person or on Zoom, as we explore the Mitzvah to Love. Okay. See you all. Have a wonderful day. Olia, Sarah, Joy, and Ray. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Take care.